General, thanks for taking time to talk with me today. I'm not going to ask you to talk about the president's comments about nuclear Armageddon and all of that, but it is something that's top of mind because of what he and others have said in terms of Russia's, hinting at and threats to use nuclear weapons. What's the Pentagon's perspective on this situation?
Yeah, thank you, JJ. Well, we continue to take Russia's nuclear threats very seriously, but have not seen any reason to adjust our own strategic nuclear posture at this time, nor do we have indications that Russia is preparing to imminently use nuclear weapons. So we continue to carefully monitor the situation. We're staying in close consultation with our allies and partners. But in the meantime, our focus continues to be on supporting Ukraine and enabling them to defend their country.
We hear a lot about tactical nuclear weapons versus strategic nuclear weapons. And I think the thing we've been hearing a lot about recently is there's a low likelihood that Russia will do anything nuclear, but if they did, it would be tactical. What's the difference between, for our listeners, what's the difference between tactical nukes and strategic nukes?
Yeah, well, first of all, as many have said within the U.S. government, to include Secretary Austin, this kind of nuclear saber rattling is dangerous, it's irresponsible, and so, again, we continue to take these threats very seriously and do not see at this time any need to change our nuclear posture. In terms of the difference between strategic or so-called tactical battlefield nukes, really comes down to the size of the nuclear yield, so to speak. All that to say, though, is it doesn't really matter because a nuclear weapon is a nuclear weapon. The use of any nuclear weapon would be disastrous for the world. And as others have said, we don't believe that a nuclear war could be won and should never be fought. And so, again, our focus continues to be on supporting Ukraine in their fight. But in the meantime, we'll continue to take these threats very seriously.
In that regard, as you continue to support Ukraine, and of course the U.S. is not in a direct war with Russia, what happens if Russia does use a nuclear weapon? What does the Pentagon do?
Well, again, I don't want to get into hypothetical situations. Clearly, as our leaders have said, there would be consequences. I'm not going to go into what those consequences would be, other than to say that we could expect to see a significant international response and international outrage. And so, again, we'll continue to consult closely with our allies and our partners around the world.
One of the things that has been very clear in recent days, weeks, and even months now is the instability of Russia's military and the fact that they've failed at most everything they've done. What have you seen lately in terms of what Russia's trying to do with the mobilization and its, I guess, engagement with Belarus, Iran, North Korea? What does all of that tell you about Russia right now?
Well, what it tells us is that from a strategic standpoint, they have failed in their operational objectives on the battlefield. We've seen early on issues with command and control, issues with logistics, sustainment, morale within their forces, and as evidenced by their reaching out to countries like North Korea and Iran to request arms and ammo. It's indicative of the dire straits they find themselves in terms of sustaining their military operations. As far as the mobilization goes, clearly this was meant to address a manpower issue within the Russian military, but it doesn't address the systemic problems that they're having on the battlefield as it relates, again, to things like logistics, sustainment, command and control.
You talked about North Korea and you talked about Iran. I'll get to Iran in just a moment, but you gave a very robust response from the podium at the Pentagon yesterday when asked about North Korea's acts and how the U.S. was responding. And you mentioned that the U.S. Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group was joined by 2 Japanese destroyers from the Navy and South Korea's Navy sent a destroyer as well on the 5th of October. Where does that situation stand? Have things calmed a bit there in that region?
Well, we have not seen any new missile tests overnight. Again, we continue to monitor very closely when we stay in close consultation with our allies in the region, Japan and the Republic of Korea. And so our focus remains on trying to ensure that the Indo-Pacific region remains peaceful, that it remains stable. And again, this is something that we'll continue to monitor very closely in the days ahead. Okay.
The situation with Iran and Iran's involvement in the war with Russia, supplying drones to Russia. Iran's denied that they have done that. Is there any proof that that Iranian drones are being used by the Russians?
We have very clear information that Iran has provided drones to Russia, and we're seeing them used on the battlefield in Ukraine. And it's a mixed bag. What we're seeing is that the Russians are employing them both for intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance missions, but then also using one of the drones for one-way attacks. In other words, these are meant to strike military targets. However, they're also using them to strike civilian infrastructure in various locations throughout Ukraine, which again is demonstrative of the kind of operations that Russia is conducting in Ukraine and causing death and destruction to innocent civilians. And so the effectiveness of those drones, again, it's really a mixed bag. There is credible information that Ukraine has been able to shoot down some of those drones. But again, it's something that we'll continue to watch closely in the days ahead.
And let me just, if I might, throw a question in there about Belarus. And if you can't go there, I understand, but I need to see if I can ask anyway. You know, we've been hearing from the very beginning, since before this war started, about the cooperation between Belarus and Russia. Have you seen any participation in any way from Belarus in this war, whether it's weapons, whether it's manpower, whether it's activity?
It's something that we monitor. I don't have any specific details that I could provide you with, JJ. But, again, we continue to keep a close eye on the region. Our focus, though, right now is on supporting Ukraine and ensuring that they have what they need to continue the fight.
All right, sir. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you think is important as we consider the importance of the U.S. Role in helping Ukraine and doing it in a really big way with I think, $17 billion plus worth of equipment and invaluable training and advice? Anything I haven't asked you about that you think is important?
So, yes. So what I would tell you, JJ, is that the Department of Defense in the United States continue to work very closely with our international allies and our partners to support Ukraine in their fight against Russia and to defend their sovereign territory. Next week, the Secretary of Defense will travel with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs to Brussels. We'll conduct another session of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. You'll have nearly 50 nations there to discuss how we can all continue to work together and best support Ukraine in this fight, which I think is really indicative of the level of international support and focus on this. And so going forward, we will continue to do what we need to do to support them.
Well, General Ryder, it's a pleasure to talk to you again, and I appreciate, as always, the thorough nature of your answers and the candid nature of your answers as well. Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you, JJ. I appreciate it.